Okay, here goes another Saturday morning in Guatemala, and I'm gonna do a couple of videos now on her life because you're probably, if anyone's watching these videos, wondering where did she get all this stuff, and I think that's why she basically wrote this, her autobiography called Contemplative, to kind of let people see a little bit about her background and all the experiences she had. It's not that she was proud of these experiences. In fact, she just wanted to be normal and fit in, but she was bombarded by so many graces that she started really questioning, why me? So this is one of the answers that she came up with. The only hint of a reason I could come up with was that from the beginning, God knew I would never be an easy believer, that I was incapable of accepting any truth I could not verify for myself or come to know through my own experiences. In the end, however, I had to admit God's mind was inscrutable and accept the fact that I would never know why me. In my mid-20s, however, the question came up one day in the silence of prayer. I simply posed the question to God and went back to my silence expecting no answer at all. To my surprise, however, I got the answer, a knowledge whose truth I never doubted, a truth so beautiful and touching, it is almost too precious to relate. She remembered that when she was 11 and still on crutches, she went to visit her grandfather's grave, and her father showed her another grave who was her older brother who had never been born because he was what's called a blue baby. He was born not breathing, and her father broke down crying because her father believed that that child, because it had not been baptized, was not in heaven. He still believed in limbo and things like this. So here's a quote from her father. This is her father's voice speaking. You can imagine how my heart sank when you, pointing to Bernadette, didn't breathe. She was also born a blue baby. The doctor baptized you immediately and then began dunking you back and forth between tubs of hot and cold water. Still you didn't breathe. I prayed, "O God, take her for yourself. I give you to her. I give her to you. I give up all the joys of having her and accept the sorrow of losing her. Only take her to yourself." Just then you cried out, and I shouted for joy. She belonged to God before she belonged to this world. His meaning, of course, was that having been baptized before I breathed, I belonged to God first, and only secondarily to this world. And this is her reflecting on this. When he said, "Take her, she's yours, not mine," God did just that. He not only took the child, but raised her every step of the way. A difficult way, since it was not known by nature. It was not her way by nature. So the answer to why me was the working out of a covenant between God and a father, a covenant that worked both ways. The father gave his child to God, and in turn, God gave the child everything. Although this child could have been any child in the world, the same could not be said of the father. Not just any father could enter into such a covenant. Only one who truly and deeply valued eternal life, with God above life on this earth, could be party to such a contract. This was not the last-ditch plea or prayer of an anxious father. Rather, it was his whole belief system, his faith, his life of faithful practice, all brought to bear and put on the line before God, who alone can enact such a covenant. Had God not accepted, I would not be here to tell the story. Would that every child was the product of such a covenant between their earthly and heavenly fathers. My life, then, has just been the working out of this covenant. And as a middle term, it could be said, I am this covenant. So we'll do the couple of videos here on her first 8 years of life so you can see that where she got all this stuff did not come from nowhere. Then I'll do videos on the next 8 years of her life until she entered a monastery. Once she entered the monastery, she says that her Christian journey basically was in conformity with what most people believe about Christianity. But up until that point, she had many struggles, many conflicts, many doubts, often questioning everything she was told. So starting at age 2, she relates that her father had a lifelong devotion to Our Lady. And during the First World War, unmarried and stationed in France, anytime he could get a leave, he would go to Lourdes and help carry the sick from the train station to the grotto. So she grew up in a thoroughly, overwhelmingly Catholic environment, and although her mother was Protestant, her mother became Catholic, and well, that's just how she was raised. Sorry, thought I was more organized. At least I remember to put on a shirt. The weather here is so beautiful. From the age of 2, I was perfectly aware of everything going on around me. She tells a funny story of going up to where her mom was praying after Mass in front of the tabernacle at the altar rail, and after a few minutes, she came and stood on the step beside her, and she put her arm around me, pointed to the tabernacle, and whispered, "Jesus is in there." I looked and looked, then whispered back, "How can he fit?" Obviously, I had in mind the life-size Jesus on the crucifix to the right of the altar. Mother just smiled and went back to her prayers, but I persisted, "How can he breathe? What does he do in there?" But Mother just shook her head for me to be quiet and went back to her prayers. After that, leaning on the altar rail, I slid down to the end of it, stretching my neck to see behind the altar. After a bit, I slid back to Mom and whispered, "I think his feet are sticking out the back." That was it. Mom left the church in a hurry before she laughed out loud. So she's getting a little bit of an introduction to the difference between Jesus and Christ at age 2. Here's a picture of her at age 3. She tells a story of what happened to her when she was sitting on the beach. They lived a block away from Venice Beach. It was a beautiful day at the beach, and I sat alone near the shore watching the waves break when something indistinct seemed to emerge from the waters in front of me. Though visibly unseen, it was so huge and close that the waves seemed far in the background. It remained there unmoved for some time, seemingly staring at me as if it wanted to be sure I saw it. At first I broke out in goosebumps and was poised to get up and run. What verged on fear was not so much its sudden appearance, but its deliberate, sustained focus on me. I had a sense it wanted to communicate something or expected something of me, but not a thought came to mind. Later in life, recalling this experience, I would think of it as an invisible face with large, serious, dark eyes staring at me. Another experience she had was she was visiting her father, who was a lawyer, in his den upstairs at his desk, surrounded by his law books, and she said, referring to this picture, "Who's that?" And her father said, "He's a monk." "What's a monk?" "He is someone who has dedicated his whole life to God." "What's he doing there?" "He's contemplating." "What's that?" Dad leaned back in his chair and thought for a moment. To contemplate means to look at God. What's he looking at? The monk is looking at God, contemplating God.